Thank you. Thank you very much. We have another song to share together. We shall overcome. And that will be followed by our meditation and then our service with Gordon.
You all know the words to this. They'll be up in a second. But I just want to say, one of the challenges that I have is we are so blessed with such great music that's done during the week and recorded for these services that it's like, gosh, do I sing along or do I just listen? So do whatever you want. But I really want to appreciate our music team for the wonderful job they've done. I said,
we shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday, every day, today. As I breathe into that energy, I bring through the power of imagination a vision for a world that is free. Free to love, to be. Free of fear, free of hatred. Free of prejudice, free of war. A world where freedom means that we are finally free to live from the heart. For I do believe deep in my heart that we shall overcome all limitations. We shall be free. As I sink deeper into sacred communion, I contemplate that idea of personal freedom. What would my life be if I lived totally from my heart? If I was absolutely free to send loving energy to every single person I met? If I was free of the need to judge or to label? If I was free of any fear of the other? Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." The great truth that I open my heart to in this moment is the truth that that only presence and power that we call God is the presence and power that is me and every human being, indeed every life form, indeed every speck of creation. That which separates us exists only in my mind. And in this now moment, I begin to break down those walls of separation. I envision the walls in my mind, walls that I label race, religion, orientation, identity, political, ethnic. I see each of them as a wall. And I see each and every bit of those walls being blessed and surrounded with a white light that gently and easily dissolves the wall. Through my power of imagination, I see that which was contained in those walls spreading and mingling, co-mixing, until all creation is one vibrant energy, one vibrant glow, one vibration of love and harmony. I feel that energy surrounding me, enfolding me. It feels as though it is a warm, soothing light. I am buoyant. I am free. I am. I rest now in peaceful oneness, free and unlimited in the silence. In peaceful oneness, I affirm the Father and I are one. The Mother and I are one. You and I are one. Creation and I are one. I am spiritually and physically connected to all of God's creation. And in spirit, there is no piece of creation that is not perfect and whole. Deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday, perhaps today, for the great overcoming begins with me, begins in my heart. I allow it to flow into my mind. I allow it to have room in the forefront of my consciousness. I affirm it. I affirm it with my voice, with my deeds, with every breath that I take. I shall overcome. We shall overcome all that separates us from one another, from God's creation, and from God. I am one. We are one. And so it is. Amen.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Oh, imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join me, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing from all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one.
Wow. You know, I remember the first time I ever heard that song way back in junior high school, and how it just really awakened, I think, my soul. Yeah, I don't even know what to say about it, but thank you guys. What a beautiful song. And good morning. Today we are embarking on a well, we're not really embarking on a tangent. We are continuing our tangent, our series, if you will, our kind of mini series on freedom and what it is, and how we are working to bring it forth into our world, especially with everything that's going on in our world today. You know, we just spent a number of weeks exploring the evolution of spirituality. We've celebrated last Sunday and last weekend the founding of our nation. We've talked about freedom of religion. We've talked about freedom from religion. And that was quite unintentional that it fell when it did in the series of talks that I've been doing. And yet I think it's very appropriate. It's in divine timing. For this concept of freedom is something that is always evolving in human consciousness. It's always evolving in our national consciousness. It's a story of the evolution of humanity. It's at the forefront of our questioning, at the forefront of our societal experience. And it is something we are always struggling with. It's not an easy concept, and it has no clear answers. And maybe that's a good thing, because maybe it calls us to be aware. It calls us to explore. It calls to us to open our hearts and our minds to it. So let's dive in. Let's dive into this question of freedom and what it means when we say no one is free until everyone is free in the midst of all the experiences we are having as people, as a nation, as a culture, as a species. We say we live in a free country, but no one with any intelligence can say that it's equally free for everybody. That's a given. We know it's not. We know there's work to be done in that area. The demographic facts and figures show it. And you can look those up for yourself. I'm not going to quote them all. But today we're going to try to get to the heart of the idea of freedom. Of course, a good place to start on any of these quests is the dictionary. I looked up the definition of freedom in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and it states this: freedom is the quality or state of being free, such as the absence of necessity, coercion, or constraint in choice or action. B, in liberation from slavery or restraint or from the power of another, independence. But what is freedom really? That's the dictionary definition of freedom. But if you really start to delve into it and investigate it, you'll find there's several layers to freedom, several different directions you can approach freedom from. The first is personal freedom. Of course, you know, I have people now telling me that, well, I should be free to do whatever I want. Sure, you should, but it's not always practical. You know, there has to be some limits on that. You know, where do you draw the line? Am I free to go out and burn down my neighbor's house because I think it's ugly? Am I free to walk around naked in public? What is personal freedom? Obviously, we agree as society to set some boundaries. And those boundaries sometimes do get fluid. There's societal freedom. What are we free to do as a society? How do we try to ensure freedom for the individual while at the same time maintaining some sense of order? And finally, of course, there's spiritual freedom. And the great challenge before us as a nation, and perhaps as a species, is gaining clarity in knowing the difference between freedom and discipline, responsibility, and compassion. And these questions run the full spectrum from individual to societal to political to spiritual freedom. They're really all the same question. What is freedom? And how do we practice being free as a group of 7 billion human beings? These last few years, we've seen these questions brought to the fore in ways that have not really been brought up before. And I'm just going to say this, that much of our struggle with these ideas is due to a lack of education. There's some very false ideas about the foundation of our country, about our founding fathers, about our history. And, you know, I could spend week after week after week going into all of that. But the ignorance of history has caused a lot of the fighting that we are seeing. You know, this week we've watched, and I have been kind of personally attacked on the concept of wearing masks in public, and why we're not gathering as a church. First of all, I would say that it is not my decision alone. It is a board decision, and we take into consideration the safety of everybody in the congregation. So if you want to get mad at me, that's fine. I got big shoulders, but I don't make these decisions by myself. And we've seen this go to the other side of the extreme in our culture, as right now the conversation, sometimes peaceful, sometimes not so peaceful, on the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the equality of all races, of all genders, of all sexual identities, of all ethnicities, indeed, of all of humanity. So ultimately, these questions are universal. They are always in the heart of every human being, and they should be. This should be questions that we are exploring. The truth is, no great leader of any nation in all of history has ever believed that freedom equals anarchy. Doing whatever makes an individual feel good is not what anybody taught, ever. None of the great teachers ever taught that you can do anything you want if it makes you feel good. Jesus did not teach that. The Buddha did not teach that. Our founding fathers did not believe that. And unity does not believe that. With great freedom comes great responsibility. You know, we have this idea, and it's, I think unity, we struggle with it more than some other denominations because we do strive to embrace the concept of freedom, but there's also the concept of doing what is best for the greater whole. And thus there are some things that we just cannot do when we do gather together. Some years ago, we kind of got into a place where people were bringing their dogs, and personally, I loved it. I love dogs, and it was really cool. But then there's a safety issue. And at some point we had to say, well, we just can't do that for the safety of the greater whole, because some people have allergies and some dogs are not always as socially appropriate as others. So we have to, as human beings, we have to have boundaries. We have to have some sort of guidelines as to how we express freedom in our daily actions. And our great teachers like Jesus also dealt with this. We believe that with great freedom comes great responsibility. This is a phrase I have heard many times throughout my life, and it seems to be real popular right now. And I kind of got curious as to, well, where did that come from? And I looked it up, and of course, right now, everywhere you look, it's being attributed to Peter Parker. And you may not know who Peter Parker is unless you're a fan of Spider-Man. Peter Parker is Spider-Man's human side, and Stan Lee is the creator of Spider-Man, and he quoted that. But even though it's being attributed to him in pop culture, he's not the one who originated the saying. The oldest iteration of that saying I could find was from a document from the French National Convention of 1793. And I just have to say this because it's fun to try to say in my pitiful attempts at speaking French. It's from a document entitled The Plan de Travail de Surveillance et de Correspondance Purpose par la Comité de Salut Public aux représentants du people du Parti per des armées de la République. That was fun. What it was a statement that said, we want to establish freedom, but we have to have some guidelines about how to do that. The idea of freedom throughout the ages includes the concept of responsibility to the greater welfare of everyone, although that has rarely been the experience. And so maybe it's time that we can begin to create a new meme around freedom. And maybe we can bring in some spiritual principles to it. You know, our founding fathers' ideas of freedom were good ideas. And I think they understood that the concepts they were setting forth would be a work in progress. I think that's one of the big misconceptions we have when we look at the founding of our nation, is that we had these founding fathers that wrote the Declaration of Independence, the original Articles of Confederation, and then the Constitution of the United States. And we have this idea that they were supposed to be perfect, that they were supposed to be, you know, completely living these ideals. That would have been a tall order. Even now, that would be a tall order. I think they understood that this was going to be a work in progress, that there were going to be the issues of slavery and issues that they couldn't even foresee that would come up as time went on. So one of the things I told my students when I was teaching history is we can't rightly judge ancient peoples, or even not so ancient peoples, based on the mores of today. Because quite honestly, we don't have all that much room to brag ourselves. We are a work in progress as well. We are evolutionary beings. We are always evolving and always growing. So we can set these standards, these ideals, and then we work to bring them into realization. I've been reading a lot of the letters of our founding fathers since it is around the July 4th time. And I found this one from Thomas Jefferson to Dr. James Curie, written on January 28, 1786, in which he says, "Freedom is the great parent of science and virtue, and that a nation will be great in both, always in proportion as it is free." So he was saying here that freedom allows for science, it allows for virtue, and that if we want to be free, we always have to be working on these principles. He goes on to explain, "A free people put the welfare of the nation at the forefront to ensure that individual freedoms are made possible. It is necessary that there be concern for the welfare of the greater whole so that individual freedom may flourish." That last line is important. It is necessary that there be concern for the welfare of the greater whole so that individual freedom may flourish. And it's sometimes rather difficult to understand what is the welfare of the greater whole. What does that look like? And we disagree sometimes as to what that looks like. You know, Jefferson, I just want to interject here that Jefferson used the common vernacular of the day of the word men to represent humanity as a whole. That was common in those days. We change it a little bit nowadays. But I'm finding out people aren't really aware of that. So just understand, when it says men, it means all people of all races, of all genders, of all sexual identities, male and female, what have you. Another letter written between contained within the correspondence between Jefferson and John Adams, dated August 1st, 1816, says this, and this was Jefferson writing it: "Bigotry is the disease of ignorance, of morbid minds. Education and free discussion are the antidotes of both." So even though we know Jefferson was not perfect in this regard, he owned slaves, we know that. But there was this concept of a higher ideal to be striven for. And it's pretty powerful there when he says, "Bigotry is the disease of ignorance and morbid minds. Education and discussion are the antidotes of both." In other words, he was saying, we got work to do on this. We need to keep talking about it. We need to keep working on it. And only through that will we eventually heal it. I found another letter in which Thomas Paine said this: "Whatever is my right as a man is also the right of every other man. And it becomes my duty to guarantee as well as to possess these rights." That was from his essay, The Rights of Man. He goes on to say, "When it can be said by any country in the world, my poor are happy, neither ignorance nor distress is to be found among them. My jails are empty of prisoners. My streets are empty of beggars. The aged do not want. The taxes are not oppressive. The rational world is my friend, because I am the friend of happiness. When these things can be said. When these things can be said, then that country boasts its constitution and governments. Independence is my happiness. The world is my country, and my religion is to do good. Tall order. Something tall to strive for. Benjamin Franklin liked to quote a friend of his named John Webb, and who said this: freedom is not a gift bestowed upon us by other men, but a right that belongs to all men by the laws of God and nature. John Jay said this: justice is indiscriminately due to all, without regard to number, wealth, or rank. So our founding fathers, as I said, had these high ideals of freedom and equality and justice, but they were unable to provide it for everyone. Nonetheless, they put it out there. They created documents which put it in front of us. They started the great work. So what is spiritual freedom then? How do we bring in spiritual freedom to this? Not religious freedom, but spiritual freedom. Jesus said this. He said, love your God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and body. And the second greatest commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. There's a couple things that we don't often take into account when we read the Bible and we hear the things that Jesus said. One of the things that we forget is he was talking to a diverse audience. He wasn't just talking to the Jews of his community. He was talking to the Roman soldiers who were in attendance. He was talking to Arabs who were in attendance. He was talking to Greeks. He was talking to Egyptians who were in attendance. He lived in a very metropolitan area where there were diverse people from all over the world. There were Africans. There were probably some Asians that came with the caravans. So he was speaking to a very large audience. And I want to point out that he said specifically, love your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and body. He didn't say love my God with all your heart, mind, soul, and body. He didn't even say love me with all your heart, mind, soul, and body. He said, love your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and body. And then he said, love your neighbor as yourself. He didn't say love my neighbor, my Jewish neighbor, because I live in a Jewish community. He said, love your neighbor wherever you are, whoever your neighbor is. If your neighbor is black, love them with all your heart, mind, soul, and body. If your neighbor is Roman, love them with all your heart, mind, soul, and body. If your neighbor is gay, and they didn't talk about that much in those days, but he didn't say, don't love your neighbor if they're not like us. He said, love your neighbor whoever they may be, with all your mind, heart, soul, and body, as you love yourself. So Jesus was very universal in his teachings. Jesus was aware of his culture and where many of the ideas in his culture came from. In Leviticus, there's a passage that says this, and Jesus referred to it. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as a native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In Proverbs, it says this, unequal weights and unequal measures are both alike an abomination to the Lord. And that measures includes how we measure one another, how we measure all people. In Matthew, it says this, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne, and all of the nations will be gathered before him. And he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Now, before I go further with this, I want to explain what this terminology meant in Jesus' day. He was not speaking about little fluffy sheep and goats. He was talking about two different areas of consciousness. This was a pretty common metaphor in his day. Sheep consciousness consciousness referred to those who had a consciousness of community, who had a consciousness of following spirit, following a shepherd. Goats were more people who had a consciousness of individuality, who were more into the worldly experience. Mammon, call it what you will. So he's talking about different levels of consciousness. So I'm going to go on now. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." And then the righteous, in the Greek it says, and then the goats will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison, or go to visit you?" And the king replied, "Verily I tell you, that whatever you do for one of the least of my brothers and sisters, you do for me." So he was saying, love your neighbor as yourself is the same thing as loving God. You cannot possibly love God if you do not love your neighbor. And you can't love yourself if you do not love your neighbor, nor can you love your neighbor if you cannot love yourself. In unity, we say this: freedom demonstrates the trust of our oneness. That's from Sue Sicking, a unity minister and author. Freedom demonstrates the trust of our oneness. It demonstrates our trust that we are one with God, that we are worthy of love and respect. And as importantly, it demonstrates our trust that our neighbors are worthy of the same love. Our Black neighbors, our Asian neighbors, our gay neighbors, our straight neighbors, our neighbors of different religions and different nationalities. James Dillett Freeman talked a lot about freedom and how we practice it in unity. He said this: without discipline, there is no freedom. And part of that discipline, the word discipline comes from the word disciple. And part of that discipline is seeing that oneness in one another and not doing anything that would harm another. James Dillett Freeman also said the freedom that is God's freedom is not an easy freedom. It comes only with growth. It comes only with strength. It's a freedom that means we have to constantly be working on it. We have to constantly be striving for a greater and clearer expression of it and practice of it. Charles Fillmore, in his book Christ Enthroned in Man, said this: we know that our freedom will come by cooperating intelligently with law. And he was not talking specifically civil law. He was talking about spiritual law. In Jesus Christ Heals, he wrote, if anyone tries to free himself while holding others in the thought of bondage, there's no way that he can demonstrate his freedom. No one can rise except that they lift the entire race with them. And when Charles used the word race, he was talking about the race of humanity, the species. So listen to that again. If anyone tries to free himself while holding others in bondage while holding others in the thought of bondage, he cannot demonstrate his freedom. No one can rise except they lift the entire race with them. That is why this struggle for freedom is so important, not just as a nation, not just as a people, but as spirits expressing as God. We should be constantly striving to move forward in freedom and to help others be free. It's kind of the bodhisattva idea. And the bodhisattva idea is simply no one achieves enlightenment until we all achieve enlightenment. We all have to get there together because we cannot get there alone. Unity minister Russell Lake wrote this: "We need not fight to acquire freedom. We are born with it. We need only to express it in ways appropriate to the environment, the only restraints being the common sense God gave us and the desire to see all people free." As I said, every great teacher, every great movement, every great nation had as its foundation some idea of freedom. But what of equality? What of equality? Because that's very much a part of freedom. Unity, for that, in unity, we need only look at our statement of social action adopted by Unity Worldwide Ministries and signed by all of the Unity ministries that are members. The word unity is defined as the state of forming a complete and pleasing whole. At this time in the evolution of the planet and the lives of the human beings upon it, the task of forming a complete and pleasing whole is the imperative for positive evolution and harmonious existence for all. This perspective has seemingly been lost. Our wholeness, our oneness, our sameness as a race. We must now remember more than ever that we have much more in common than that which divides us. The unity movement stands for, and will tirelessly work for, harmony, so all people may know the freedom of peaceful expression, so they may know their own inner worth and essential contribution to the whole of life. I want you to note that in that statement, there is nothing that divides or separates anyone. There is no difference of religion. There is no difference of race. There is no difference of gender identity, no difference of nationality. And the key things that we want all people to know about unity in this case is that there is freedom of peaceful expression. There is the encouragement and the empowering to know their own individual worth, and to know that we are all part of a greater whole, and to know that our soul purpose, S-O-U-L, our soul purpose, is to contribute to the whole of life for everyone. And maybe that should be our soul, S-O-L-E, purpose as well, to contribute to the whole of life for everyone. It goes on to say that where there are divisions of opinions, beliefs, and perspectives, unity embraces curiosity. That's why we talk about some of the things we talk about. It encourages exploration and expanded awareness of the gifts of diversity. Where there is fear of the other, unity stands for inclusivity and peaceful acceptance of another's right to create the life of his or her own choosing. Where there is oppression or hatred, we stand for justice and understanding, and for extending compassion, kindness, and forgiveness to restore balance. Where there is discrimination, we stand for inclusivity and equality. Therefore, we pledge to be an advocate for the well-being, respect, and civil freedom of every human being, which specifically means that we have a shared responsibility to ensure the safety and health of our fellow human beings, even if it means we have to be uncomfortable, even if it means we can't gather together in person at this time, even if it means we stand out in the hot sun, standing up for the value and dignity of all races, even if it means we are uncomfortable. Any proposal or action that seeks to discriminate against individuals or even classes of individuals based on prejudice, stereotypic profiles of national origin, class, creed, race, ethnicity, physical ability, sexual orientation, or gender identity is in opposition to the core beliefs and values established by the founders of Unity. So that's why we talk about this. And it's why we truly do more than just talk about it. It's why we have booths at Pride Fest. It's why we do march for Black Lives Mattering. It's why I created the How to Be an Anti-Racist class. It's why we do all of the things we do. Everything that I do as a minister, I look at how does it fit this? How does it fit our mission, vision, and values? How does it foster greater awareness and greater evolution of these concepts? And by the way, I just want to add that we're the only church in the area doing this. And I'm not just the only one saying that. I have heard from a number of people in our greater community saying, wow, no other churches in this area, none are doing this. So we can give ourselves a little bit of a pat on the back. Our social action statement includes with this: in harmony with the divine we stand, so that we may live in a spiritually awakened world that is continually evolving. This is our prayer and our decree. Through our actions, let it be. A couple of things I want to point out there is that line that says, this is a continuing, evolving work. We know we're not perfect, but we can strive to move forward. And through our actions, we foster this. We work to create it. You know, unity has always, from its very foundation, embraced science. Charles Fillmore was just fascinated with science and really saw how science was proving ancient spiritual principles. And a lot of science we have now didn't even exist in Charles Fillmore's day. Now we have DNA research, which is proving beyond any doubt that we are all one race. Color is but an effect of the environment. And beyond pigmentation, there's no difference between human beings. Quantum theory and now quantum physics have proven that there is an energetic field that connects all creation. Literally, there is no point where I end and another human being begins. There's no point where I end and any other speck of creation begins. We are all just points of focus within one giant energy field. And thus, we are energetically bound to one another. Have you ever thought about that? We are energetically bound to one another. That's why that old idea of what I do to one person affects all of us, affects me. What I do to myself affects everyone else. Wow, that is far more true than we ever knew. And it's scientifically provable now. Therefore, whatever we do affects every human being, affects every life, and probably all of creation. And so therefore, anything we do that impacts or limits the freedom of one person limits the freedom of all people. Anything we do that represents the quality of one person's life limits the quality of all life. We are many parts, but we are also one. And no one is free until we all are free. Rajneesh wrote this: the freedom from something is not true freedom. The freedom to do anything you want to do is also not true freedom. Is not the freedom I am talking about. My vision of freedom is to be yourself and to make it safe for others to be themselves. Aung San Suu Kyi, a writer, said this: the only real prison is fear. Fear of others, fear of truth, fear of ideas, fear of the unknown. The only real freedom is freedom from fear. We call our country the land of the free and the home of the brave. We cannot be one without the other. And I think sometimes we've forgotten what bravery is. Now we say, well, if you're in the military, you're brave. If you're a firefighter or a first responder, you're brave. And that is true. But we forget that bravery is much more than placing your physical life in danger. Bravery is standing up for others, is standing up for the ability to grow, for the ability to express as individuals, to the ability to have the same rights, privileges, and expectations as everyone else. Real bravery is talking to a person who is different from you and listening to that person. Real bravery is considering the welfare of others instead of our own comfort or convenience. Real bravery is ensuring that people of color or different gender identity or different sexual orientation or different nationality have the same expectation of safety and dignity that we do. Real freedom is standing up for anyone who is oppressed. Real bravery fosters freedom. And there can be no freedom without that bravery. So in this moment, as a nation, we are struggling with that. We are looking at that. And some people would say, well, that's uncomfortable. I don't like this. And yet we live in a place where we can do this, where we are free to wrestle with these questions. We are free to argue about it. We are free to fight about it. We are free to be brave. This moment we are in as a nation, as a culture, as a community is a moment of decision. Will we be brave? Will we stand up for one another? Will we work for freedom for every single one of our brothers and sisters, regardless of color, regardless of sexual identity, regardless of nationality, regardless of immigration status? Or will we fight for our rights to be comfortable, to be not inconvenienced, to be ignorant of the other? We have that freedom too. We, though, will be deciding in the months and the years, probably in the centuries ahead. We will be deciding whether we choose to follow the teachings of the great teachers, of the Buddha, of the Christ, towards real, honest, spiritual freedom or bondage. We will decide whether to create that new and better normal or go back beyond the normal, below the normal we had before. Because you can't go back to what was under any circumstances. We have those choices to make. And we, as a community, can be part of fostering the choice to move ahead, the choice to be at the forefront of spiritual evolution, of the forefront of the great educational movement inaugurated by Jesus the Christ, as Charles Fillmore said. We will decide ourselves and our culture in the days and the months and the years ahead. We will decide, hopefully, that no one is free until everyone is free. And unity will stand for freedom for all. As the psalmist wrote, "Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers and sisters dwell together in unity." Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you. That was the reset that I needed. Not that it's all about me, but I do appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Once again, we'd like to welcome our visitors. You just got an excellent example of what we're all about. I hope that you'll join us, that you'll return next Sunday at 11 Central Time, and that you will visit the website and the Facebook page to learn more about how you can become involved wherever you are. We welcome you. We also like to bless our children, and we recognize not just the real children, but the children within us, that inner child that needs just as much love and appreciation as we give to the children of our world. And so we do that with the kids' blessing. And
I'm trying to bring it up here. I don't know why this is being so persnickety today.
So just call to mind the children that have graced our church in the past and currently. Call to mind a neighbor's child, your grandchild, as we extend this blessing to them.
Okay, is it up?
It is up, and we can see it, and we're going to go with it.
Okay.
So, together, please. Children, you are a perfect child of God, and God and I love you just the way you are. So true. So true. All right, we're going to sing our peace song, have our prayer for protection, and then don't forget, if you want to hang out and just chat with us a little bit.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God as creator, we are family. Let us walk with each other in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my solemn vow. To take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
And together, the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Amen. And thank you all for being with us today.
Yes, have a great week.
And I'm just going to give a shout out to those I can see here on Facebook today. Merlin, good to see you, and Sherry and Virginia and Jennifer and Monica and Ellen and Mike and Melanie and Mark and Carol and Janet Johnson. By the way, it's I think today is actually her birthday, so
Today's
happy
her
birthday,
birthday,
Janet.
yeah.
Kelsey, good to see you. Leslie, Michael, you're in many places. Debbie. So, and I'm sure there's more on there. That's the.
I see Elizabeth.
Oh, Elizabeth. Hi, Elizabeth. And so we're so glad you all joined us on Facebook. And we want you to know to have an absolutely wonderful week.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And of course, to everybody on Zoom.
Oh, I'm going to sign off, but it's good to see you guys. Have a good day.
You too, Ann.
All right.
You too, Ann. Bye, Ann. Have a great week.
Thank you. Thank you.